Hello? Okay, I guess we can get started while folks are milling in. Just to let you know what session you're in, we're going to be talking about the business catalog, just so you know you're in the right place. That's me. All right, here we go. Okay, let's get started here. So a couple of things. The first disclaimer is there will not be a demo for this yet, but we are going to have a lively discussion, I think. One of the things that we've been working on in terms of the business catalog is really the design, the business catalog itself, but also the way we design it, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. So unlike most presentations, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Let's keep this actually interactive. I think that'll make it better for everybody. So I have someone to help me. You want to come sit? This gentleman, his name is Saeed. And you just have a seat. Yeah. He's also wrote the white paper for Atlas, so he's an authoritative resource. Feel free to ask him any question you want. Okay. Oh, I guess I should give a little intro on myself. So my name is Andrew. I'm the director. I cover governance for Hortonworks. In a former life, I worked for the NYSE Euronext, dealt primarily with trade data, especially regulatory concerns and operations, right? Okay, so let's get started. So today we're going to talk about the overview of Atlas. Can I get a show of hands of folks who are familiar with Atlas? Just want to make sure I don't spend too much time on it. Okay, about a third of the room. Okay, I think I recognize some of your faces. I promise I'll try not to have too much overlap from the other session that we had. We'll talk about the near-term roadmap. I get this question often in terms of what we're going to deliver when. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about are concerns, are aspects that many enterprises need. And so in terms of figuring out your decision of whether to build or to buy or just to wait, perhaps this will help you in terms of making a more informed choice. And then we'll jump into the business catalog itself, and then we'll have more time for questions, right? So let's get started. Little overview. Got our new animation there. So really, the initial part of what we wanted to do with Atlas was really to take care of the compliance use cases, right? So in a traditional EDW, you've got to take care of all these things with your current systems. Well, with Hadoop, it should not be an orphan, right? It should have the same types of responsibility and rigor that you already have in your enterprise, right? And that's really what we're after, right? We want it to be a mature platform that you can depend on for your production loads, right? So really, here we talk about different stages of Hadoop adoption. Typically, and we can get to more depth if there are folks that are interested, but typically people start with a proof of concept or a proof of technology. And once they find that they're satisfied with this, they will go into a point solution where they're basically just expanding that use case. But it's a very narrow use case, right? And it's done at perhaps a large scale. There's a third state, which is the data lake. And when you get to that third state, that's really where you have multi-tenancy, different silos of data that are together that have traditionally not been together. And that's where your governance concerns really bubble up, right? So whether you are embracing this new paradigm, these new sets of problems or not, you will eventually have to. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we lay the groundwork so when you get to that, that larger data lake, you're prepared. Right? So what are we trying to provide? We want to provide data management. We want to provide good modeling with the metadata, and we want to provide interoperable solutions. This is kind of the high-level view. I won't talk about that too much. A little bit about the history of Atlas. So Atlas is kind of different in that many projects in the open source start rather organically, right? Atlas started in a different way. We had this thing called the DGI, which is a Data Governance Initiative. And there we actually talked to customers that are in that third state that I talked about in terms of Hadoop adoption. They're really embracing the data lake, and they realized that there was a lot of governance problems that they had to address. So what we did is, in talking with them, we were able to find commonalities and ranked the use cases that they had. And from those capabilities that they needed, that's how we designed Atlas. So this is actually kind of a purposefully built open source project. It's kind of very interesting in that regard. So this is a co-dev model. This is different than what we've done in the past. So we have the organic development, as we talked about. We've also purchased private IP and turned it into an open source project. An example of that would be XA Secure. It was a private company. Hortonworks bought the rights to the code, and we released it as Apache Ranger. And Apache Atlas is done a different way. It's done through this co-dev effort. Right. So we work with a bunch of folks that you see up there. We started off in December. Because we knew what we wanted to do, we were able to kick off a prototype in February. Some folks actually used this in their product actually in February. In May, we had an incubation. That's when Atlas actually, I guess, was born. And then we had our foundation release in HTTP 2.3 in July. Now that is version that's version 5. I'm going to talk about stuff that's going to be in version 6 of Atlas, which will be coming in the summer. And just to be very open about what the differences are, it's actually quite substantial. The .5 release was really a foundation release. If you wanted to adopt this into your current set of tools and tooling, definitely helpful. Many folks have done that. But in terms of accessibility, it really required quite a bit of technical expertise and commitment to make it work. This coming release, I think we will have done much better in terms of enterprise readiness, adoption. We'll support rolling upgrades, a whole bunch of different things, and we could talk about it in detail. But I think this coming release is the one that you're going to be quite happy with and interested in. Right? Okay, kind of to further that theme, in the that early release we had, let's see if this works. Can you see that? Hey, it does work. We had Hive. So that means we had automatic Hive lineage capture. So all the metadata that would normally go through Hive Server 2, we caught that and we stuck it in Atlas. In the next release, we will include a whole bunch of other stuff. We will include Scoop, Storm, Scoop for relational database imports and exports, Storm for stream processing, Kafka for messaging, Ranger for comprehensive security. If you were in the earlier session this morning, you know all about that, and we can talk about that in the question and answer period if you like. And then Falcon for data lifecycle management. So that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to be included for cross-component native connectors for summer of 2016. By the end of the year, we'll have Spark, SQL, and NiFi integration as well, and probably one or two other things that will kind of sneak in there as well. Right. If you think about Atlas, really it's all about metadata, and that should be the takeaway, right? What we want to do is make sure that we aggregate all the metadata in Hadoop that's relevant in one place. We want to use metadata to help orchestrate activities within Hadoop. There's over 30 components, sub-projects inside of Hadoop. You don't want to manage all those things, especially the primary analytic engines you have. So what we want to do is simplify that. We want to make it so that you can go to one place within Hadoop to get that data set lineage. And then consequently, if you want to combine that with traditional enterprise data resources, you only have to connect to one place. And really, that's the takeaway, right? That aggregation has, or that orchestration has many, many benefits within Hadoop and also outside of Hadoop. And just to be clear, we want to be the metadata truth in Hadoop, and we want to communicate with anybody else that cares to listen or exchange metadata with us, right? So that's our mandate. We think we're really good in that space. There's a lot of other players in the traditional space. So, I think it's a good fit. We'll probably connect with most of the tools you already have in your enterprise data shop, right? So we're here to talk about the business catalog. So the third bullet is what we're going to talk about most, a taxonomy, right? A discrete ordering of business terms in a hierarchical fashion, right? So there's a specific context. There can be no duplicates. You really need this to have some kind of authoritative reference for your business terms, right? So here we can also do something really interesting. We can finally combine conceptual, logical, and technical metadata together for Hadoop. And this basically has not existed yet. we will make this GA in summer. And I think we're going to be the only ones to have this. Many other tools are actually leveraging this. I don't know if I can talk about this in a recorded session, but offline I can talk to you about that. I think that we are probably the only place you can get lineage across these items here, right? Okay. So why is this a big deal? Obviously, you need new tools to manage the data in that third state, that data lake. You're going to have an explosion of data. So really, you need new ways to manage your data. We think it's really through metadata, and specifically tags. If you were in the morning session today, we talked about tag-based security, and that really just goes to that third point, right? So it gives you tools to manage data at scale, right? So as your data increases, typically your staffing has to increase. Well, you can only do that for so long before it becomes unreasonable, right? So you definitely need new patterns to manage that data, and that's really what we're working on. It has to be driven through metadata. Okay, actually I should stop there. I said I wanted to make it interactive, so does anybody have any questions? I went through a lot of stuff. Okay, I'm either doing a good job or a very bad job. Okay. Or improving, thank you, appreciate it. I'll take any comments I can get, or any compliments. This is a high-level architecture. We could talk about this for a long time. I promise I won't. I will give you some salient points, though. The salient points, though, is this area right here called the type system. And the thing that I want to kind of underscore here, and it does relate to the business catalog, is that we're able to create new types very easily. And we can also create new tags. These types can have properties associated with them, and one of them could be a parent or it could be a child. And that's how we create hierarchies. We can do this for physical assets that really exist, like a Hive table or a database or a column, but we can also do it for conceptual things, right? You can create a department, and within the department you can have sub-departments. And then you can associate those with physical attributes. Or you can create a concept, a logical construct like customer. And what does that mean? Well, customer relates to tables and files. And then if you're a financial institution, you have different types of customers, credit card, mortgage. So these types of modeling exercises are really important in terms of discovering and organizing your data at scale, right? And that's really the point here. You can kind of get away with it in a traditional world, but once your data explodes, if you don't have this properly organized and at least thoughtfully arranged, there's going to be quite a bit of disorganization. Let's just leave it there. So to sum it up, to make it easier to understand, really instead of building Noah's Ark where we model every possible industry, we built something very agile. So we built something like a replicator. We could build just what you need. And this is a departure from RDM or MDM solutions. In many ways. So in those solutions, you really have a top-down organizational structure. And so typically, the first year or the first couple of months of an MDM effort turns out to be, pretty good. But as you get towards the edge, as you start getting closer to the edge cases, you realize that it's harder and harder to fit your data and your business processes into that framework, right? And that rigidity is the thing that really makes those types of deployments difficult. Usually, if you get to year 2 or year 3 of a deployment like that, it generally will never end, right? It just doesn't work out that well. So one of the things that we want to do is have a balance between something that is authoritative, a hierarchy, but something that's also very agile, right? Because if it can't adapt and be flexible, then it is of less value, right? And we really want people to use it, and that really drives the effectiveness and value, and then consequently more people use it, and we have a nice cycle there, right? So that's really driven by the type system, and inside of it is a graph database. So we specialize in relationships. So we can build many, many models, and then we can relate them to a physical asset, right? So you can actually have many meta models in Atlas, and then when you instantiate a real thing like a table or a file, you can relate them to whatever model you want, or many of them, or tags. So this flexibility is really what you need. So let's say one company buys another company. They have one notion of a customer, and this other notion of a customer exists. Well, how do you arbitrate this easily? Not an easy thing to do. You can create a super type or a parent that connects to both of them, or you can make one subordinate to the other, but we allow you to do that. And one of the things that we're going to do in this coming release is provide versioning, right? So any compliance tool has to have a notion of versioning. So we have a notion of a soft delete. So if you want to get rid of a term or an object, we actually just change the state of it behind the covers. It's done at a log and an audit level right now, but we do track it. Subsequently, in the next release for the end of the year, we'll actually have a visualization, so you can actually move a slider and actually get the landscape over time. And this will include schema changes, right? So any mutations that you have in that metadata, we'll be able to show that, right? So these are the things that we're able to do with the graph database. That's why I threw this up there, right? The other piece that I want to just identify here is that the REST APIs sit on top. So most of the access that we have to Atlas is through these REST APIs. And that's how we talk to our native connectors, and that's how basically we listen for any kind of updates, right? So if you want to write custom reports into Atlas from outside of Hadoop, you can do so. You can create a custom type that isn't even in Hadoop. Maybe you have a proprietary system, right? Instead of having database table or columns like a traditional database, or a messaging system where you have publishers and topics and subscribers, or a storm topology, you can have something totally different. Right? And that's okay. We allow you to create those types of models. And now you can use them and store that metadata in Atlas. Right? You have to be authenticated and have the appropriate permissions, but it is allowed. Right? And so basically, this kind of takes that thought and goes a little bit further. So those non-Hadoop data and metadata can now get into the HTTP platform quite easily. And so we can capture metadata from structured and unstructured sources, third-party vendors. So there you could do data interrogation or introspection, right? So we're scanning data and discovering certain attributes about that. We have a number of vendors that we have already certified with Atlas, Waterline and Data Guys, a little plug for those guys. They can interrogate your data, so they can discover things about it that may not be easily determined from the schema, let's say, right? So you can actually crack open the payload. You can use that for going against archival data that you might have had, or as an onboarding process. So you have a little bit more rigor in terms of how you import data into your data lake. We can also import metadata in bulk. If you can give us an XML file or a JSON file, we can suck it up and create both the structure itself as well as the relationship. So we can do both through these flat files. Right? And then consequently, custom reporters can obviously write directly to our REST APIs. Right. So we try to open as many different avenues to get data in, right? Obviously, you can use our GUI to, which I'll show you some screenshots of, to create this annotation and metadata, obviously by hand as well. Obviously, if you have this metadata, you want to not lose it and bring it in. Obviously, best practices is to capture as high a fidelity as you can, as close to the source as you can, right? And we want to make sure that whatever metadata you're pulling into Hadoop has a nice place to land. That agility that we have in Atlas allows us to create a nice spot for it, right? Okay, near term. So this is what you're going to get in the summer. We were able to connect all the stuff here, right? No one else can do this. So there's a custom activity report that we talked about. Scoop, Teradata. Now, Teradata connector sits on top of Scoop, so we automatically get information there. We get storm topologies, and we also get, there's a Kafka Bolt that we ship with Storm. So if you use that as a vehicle to feed a storm topology, we'll track that as well. And Apache Falcon and Hive, and data that goes back and forth between them, right? So this is the level of visibility that no one else has, right? And we're able to provide this lineage for you, right? We capture it, and we actually provide that for you in the business catalog, right? Dynamic policy driven by metadata. This was the talk this morning about leveraging metadata to do security in a different way. So I will not bore you with that part of it. I think you guys got that from the morning session. If you have questions about this, I can address them later in the session. And then the taxonomy itself. So first, we started off with interviews. So this is kind of a new discipline, and I want to ask a couple of questions here. So, in your organization, can I see a show of hands in terms of the data steward or a curator role? Do you guys have one in your organization? Wow, this is quite good. And can you also show me or raise your hand if that is a role that is a discrete role, or is that something that, that's a part-time role that somebody else, they may do different roles, and one of them is the data steward. So is it a discrete role? Is that somebody dedicated to that purpose? Well, this is great. So this is something that is emerging, and we're trying to define this with more detail so that we can build applications around that, right? So actually, it's more of a response than I had expected. So what we did is we did a bunch of interviews, and we tried to figure out exactly what they do in their day, what types of activities they engage in, where they have the most difficulty, things of that sort, right? So we used these interviews to try to really figure out some usability testing use cases specifically for these new roles, right? And then we did some analysis. We had some findings, right? We got some interesting things, right? We knew that we absolutely had to have a hierarchy, right? We needed to have a pretty good keyword search, right? We needed to have a preview or a way to kind of understand a little snippet of data, right? We wanted to know how current and updated the information is. Obviously, you want to know if it's stale, right? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we took all of these things and we really tried to boil them down to discrete roles, because really it was hard to really get this, because it's kind of an evolving state, right? So we got some persona findings, we got some information about who they are, what background they had. This wasn't so much important as the way we divided up the roles. So we came up with basically 4 major roles, and I'd love to get your responses. If we're off base here, please let me know. The data steward, the data scientist, an administrator, and a data engineer. Data engineer is pretty straightforward. They're basically in charge of getting data in and out, making sure that some semantic data quality is done. Number of rows, size of data, things like that, right? The administrator, that's pretty straightforward too. They just assign roles, right? They shouldn't be allowed to do anything. The division between the steward and scientist was interesting. It turns out the people who are going to spend the most time actually mucking around in Atlas was actually the data steward, not the data scientist. The data scientist was really the consumer of this information. And knowing that actually helped us design some of the screens differently, right? So the activities that they would engage in each role and started to split apart, and it became easier for us to manage that. And that way we presented the right information or the right capabilities in the right place, all right? Are we missing any other roles? Is there? Yes?
We've never thought of as someone who manages the supply chain. So
Mm-hmm.
more understanding the provider if it's coming from an external source on negotiating how that data is coming in, when it's coming in, whether there's any constraints about its use that can then be pulled into the catalog.
Sure. So the technical aspect of that is covered by a data engineer. But are you looking at the broader scale?
Yeah, definitely not the technical aspect, more of a business level.
So for the benefit of everybody else, I think the question was who or should there be a role that we're missing here that would kind of govern the overarching data flow across different platforms, right?
Kind of. It was really about if you're getting data from different places,
Mm-hmm.
it's a supply chain because parts of your business are responsible for it. But then somebody, it means you're not necessarily managing, you've got one person to manage the data from each of the sources, and it might be different parts of the business rather than the consumer having to negotiate directly with each
Sure,
supplier.
sure.
So there's a central role that allows a consistent way of negotiating contracts or expectations across all data suppliers, and then potentially if there's constraints around the usage of that, they can be transferred and the knowledge can be shared to the people like the data steward.
Okay.
But the data steward might not have the time to deal with all the different suppliers.
Yeah, our thinking there was that we wanted to have a scalable solution, so we would envision not having one data steward, but actually quite a few, right? And so in my mind, it wouldn't be one overarching person, because in the Hadoop paradigm, you can't do that. There's just too much data, and there's too many different silos that are going to be cohabitating that multi-tenant environment. And because of that, we wanted to have multiple data stewards doing the curation, right? But having said that, they need to be curating and creating one taxonomy, right? So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. But I see your point in that there's an overarching coordination that has to happen. Perhaps somebody who would use an enterprise scheduler for that purpose, they might be in charge of that as well, because those business rules will be encapsulated in that automated process, right? Let's take that one offline, because I think that's a larger topic, but that's a good point. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
What about you need a business representative here, such as the data owner? The data, the origin, the difference in data, and the data is considered as an asset, currency. Shouldn't we see here a business representative named data owner?
So we combined the data owner with the data domain expert, and that we combined them into data steward. And the reason why we did that is typically in an organization, if you want to get access to data, you're going to end up going to the domain expert or the data owner anyway. Why not give that person, delegate that person the rights to be the steward, right? So you can have more than one steward for the area. Like you can have one person, maybe, or a team of people do the curation role for one business unit, right? So that's possible. But we wanted to have an authoritative person in every unit so that they can manage themselves and minimize the amount of, bureaucracy that would be created, right? So that was our thinking. But by no means is this the perfect solution. This is an evolving state, and so that's something that we need to work on. We do need to work on a workflow process where you have different types of releases. In order to take care of that right now in the short term, we're working with a number of different vendors, but one of them is Colibra. So we're going to plug into their workflow. So you could also control that through that vehicle and have nice auditing, so you can make sure you're adhering to standards. Right? So this is the new UI. This UI was tested. We had 3 rounds of interviews. And we came up with some kind of interesting ways to do this. So for instance, instead of having a tree structure, it turned out that a breadcrumb with paths tended to be better, right? And on the left side of the navigation, we would provide the contents of that. And then we could quickly show you the details of that in this area, right? Right? We could also do, for data stewards, they can do in-place taxonomy management. You can create new objects and change the relationships of them on the fly if you're a data steward. Very easy to manage, right? We also facilitated classification of assets, right? There's going to be a bunch of things that are either in the wrong place. There's constant gardening that has to be done. And you're going to realize that at some point when you do this activity, there's not a proper business term or a tag or a location to drop this thing, right? So what we've decided to do was give you the capability of creating a brand new term in that context while you're classifying data, right? So we're talking about agility. These are the things that actually was really born out of those usability testing, right? This is something that a lot of tools don't allow you to do. And because of that restraint, there was a lot of pain, and actually our users let us know about this, so we created this, right? We also created a place for annotations, right? So one of the things that folks wanted was acceptable use. So now imagine a decentralized, multi-tenant data lake where you have lots of people going against the data, and there's a time scale involved, right? There's multiple people over time, so you really want to be able to encode the acceptable use policies. And I'll give you a great example, right? You can have data, a certain set of data that you're using for an aggregation to do some analysis, and you could have the person doing that, an analyst, who has rights to that data. But depending on what you're going to do with the result, that use may be acceptable or not acceptable. If one of the sources is from the internet, right, you're maybe harvesting browser information, the expectation of privacy is low. If you're also grabbing data and aggregating that with a proprietary CRM system, well, that has a high expectation of privacy. So that resulting analysis can be used for certain purposes, not for others. You can't use that for a marketing campaign to sell credit cards, But you can use it to internally maybe allocate resources to predict needs or to design a better, effective support mechanism, right? So it's a very tricky problem to solve because it's the same user, the same data set, but in one case you're not supposed to use it. So how do we solve that problem? Well, we provide as much information as we can. So we provide acceptable use, what you can use it for. There's a button here, I don't know if you can see it right here, and they have links. So we can put in the links directly of the policy or the code that would be referenced right there, right? So you can go to the business catalog, understand what that term means, the acceptable use of that, lineage of that, and also link back to any other systems you have or to the internet to understand either the regulations about it or maybe some additional information about it, right? So really, we're trying to marshal that metadata in one place. So that's really the same theme, and we're staying true to that. And we think we're doing it in an effective way, right? Consequently, you can also tag data quite easily, right? Data stewards can tag, scientists cannot, right? But you can quickly add tags, right? And you can search by those tags, obviously, as well, right? Here's something that's kind of cool. A lot of data scientists said they wanted to be able to create annotations, a notebook, right? So it was hard to create a full-fledged notebook, but we wanted to create something that was high value that we could easily implement. So we just have comments. It's just like a set of comments and a news story on the internet, right? So you can write things that would be helpful. Maybe you came up with a certain pig script to cleanse data, and it would be helpful for the next person. You can stick it right in there. Or you could say, this data is awful. Don't use it. It's misleading. It's got all these problems. So you can create some kind of annotation there. This is non-authoritative, right? But this can help people to do discovery. One of the things that we found is that most data scientists spend anywhere from 50 to 80% of the time finding data and then just getting access to it, right? That's a huge waste of resources, right? Very valuable resources, right? So if we can collapse that time to 25% of their day, then basically we've doubled your resources, right? So pretty straightforward. It actually is not that complicated, but we want to do it in a meaningful way that's helpful, right? And that's what we tried to do here. Yes, sir.
Any, let me say, approvals for comments, or is that
comments have to be, so comments have to be, I think it is on. Yeah. Oh, sorry. The question was, is there approval for comments? And the answer is, right now, there is not. Okay? The comments we want to keep kind of easy and unfettered, right? Now, the data steward can delete a comment, right? They'll get a notification, and should they so be inclined, they can delete it. Yes, sir?
Similar question. Is there a concept of published versus unpublished changes to control, so say your data steward makes some pretty significant changes, but he or she knows he still should go to someone else to authorize it or approve it. Is there kind of a release management control?
In this release, there is not. I'm just being very clear about that. This is .6. There is not in .6. Towards the end of the year, we will have that. It requires a couple of foundation pieces to be built before that. There's a notion of versioning, and I kind of talked about it earlier. Basically, it's entity or object mutations have to be tracked over time, and we have to. It's rather complicated to do it effectively, so that we can recall it. We do have an undo button, though, because we can undo it. So what we want to do is, once we get that versioning prepared and done, we'll introduce a new notion. It's kind of a mouthful. It's called a taxonomical ACL. And so we have a taxonomical tree, and each branch in the tree will have its own inheritable permissions. And so you can break off that branch, stick it in another part of the tree, and it will inherit. So that requires that we have versioning. That also requires that we have inheritance and all those other pieces in place, right? So we're getting there, but I think this is in a usable state. Said?
Is it possible to sort of follow data? Select particular entities and tag it so you get informed when there are changes to it and stuff like that. Socializing it.
Yeah, I think we took it out of here. There's a bookmark button here, so you can always go back. But there's actually another button that's going to be called subscribe. And basically, you can subscribe to any changes. So we have, in a different talk, we'll talk about some of the more the underpinnings of it. But we have a notification framework where we have a topic that we publish to, and so we have a way of emailing you changes or giving you some other kind of notification. Right. Yes, sir.
Does here lineage has to be manually fed, or do you have automatic feeding?
It's automatic for the native connectors. So that is Hive, Scoop, Falcon, Storm, Kafka, Hive. I think I got them all. Ranger, it's security, so it doesn't have lineage, right? Now, and then we can, of course, support anything that is a custom as well, right? Oh, say it.
Yeah. Oh. Any willingness to get towards web semantic for metadata description and also for search, for sure?
We have thought about maybe allowing that. We don't want to tie ourselves to a specific standard at this point. We want to maintain as much flexibility. A lot of different customers use different meta models, metadata structures. Folks will use PPDM, petroleum producers data model for energy, or a derivative. People want to use CWM or some derivative, right? So there's different types of options there. I think in that space, what we're going to do probably towards the end of the year is have a set of add-ons where that type of functionality is not just wide open, but we kind of have kind of a template for you to deploy that. So we can build those types of connections and integrations, right? So we're going to build that library out. Some of our customers have been a little reticent to publish their internal work because of IP reasons. So I think we're going to have to recreate some of that, but we will publish quite a bit of that probably by the end of the year. We're going to try to shoot for the summer because it makes sense.
Question about the versioning publishing. Can I have a time-dependent versioning publishing, or can I only create snapshot at one moment in time and go back to a snapshot? Can I, for example, say that a leave is valid from tomorrow onwards until the end of next week or something like that? Time-dependent hierarchies sometimes in businesses is quite important to look backwards, but also to prepare for future, and at one moment in time go live.
That's intriguing. We do not have that in our roadmap in terms of being able to future date the instantiation of an object.
That's very often the case that you have to prepare like that.
Sure. We can probably come up with a workaround. So for instance, we can probably come up with some kind of, scheduling job to do that in the future. Right, because you can have a delayed or a latent Uzi job to do that for you. Everything that you can do with our GUI, you can do through the APIs. So you can programmatically do it, but I see your point. We should have a nice create button and then also have another field to say effective date.
It depends on priorities and let me say the roadmap, but at least that's very often the case. That
Sure.
Like that.
Yep. Good point. Okay, I think we have 2 minutes, so let me use comments, keywords. Okay, so we classify, I think we went through, we can do faceted search. So you can do free text. We have a DSL, which is domain-specific query language. It's very SQL-like, so you can mix and match. And then we also give you authoritative tags, right? So you can do quick searches, right? Okay, I think this is the screen that I want to leave you with. So this is what you're going to get in the UX prototype. You're going to get this, okay, there we go. You're going to get this in the summer. For GA, and then we're going to have another release with the screenshots I showed you at the end of next month. So we're actually pretty close to getting there. We have to do a number of things in terms of merging them to our trunk, but it'll be there. If you guys are monitoring ASF, you'll be able to see that as well.
It's quite funny that on the last bullet, you were talking about data quality, and in the other way, you are not handling pig. Because for me, pig is somehow the tool to use to assess our data quality, and I do not see it on the picture.
So pig is supported as a Falcon process. It's one of the languages they support. So you can track lineage that way. Now, if you're doing something that's a result of that, we have some scripts that we'll try to post. So essentially, you can create a new attribute because we have very flexible modeling. That pig script can run, and then whatever measures you have, you can just write into it, right? So it's not completely automatic, but at the same time, it's very powerful in that you can change it any way you want. You know, if you want domain of values, you want histograms, or you want, you know, max min, you can create all that stuff, right? Any other questions? All right. So availability. As I mentioned, we have a tech preview right now that does not have this new UI. We have the older one, but you can download it right now. It has a lot of the underpinnings, a lot of the APIs are there already. The preview with the new UI will be out in May, and then it'll be GA in the summer timeframe around our next summit, right? So you should come to that one, by the way. It's in California. All right, I think that was it. Is there any other questions? I've got 20 seconds left. We really nailed the time. Yes, sir.
About security, you said that you reduce the time to access to the data.
Sorry, say that again, please.
Sorry. It's a question about security, because you said that you reduce the time to access to the data thanks to this tool.
Yes.
But we sometimes need like a button to say, I wish to access to this data, but that should be validated by someone or by some rules.
Request.
Yeah, and
yes.
I think there is a missing role because somebody needs to define all rules and maybe validate that somebody has to access to this data, but not mix multiple data because it's a kind of toxic rule or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that access to data is also a part of our provisioning story and self-service. That kind of goes together because, you know, sometimes you have a data of record and you really don't want to give access to that because, you know, it's, you know, evidence. You can't use it. So typically you want to give a view or you want to make a copy of that, a subset. And so that's where the provisioning comes in. And we do have a workflow. It's not going to make it to summer. We will probably have it for the end of the year, though. It'll be rudimentary in the beginning, but we will have that capability. Yeah, it's something that everybody asks for. I found the data, now I need to do something about it. How can I do it? If I don't have access to it, I need to get access to it. Oh, by the way, when we have taxonomical ACLs, we'll have a different, another layer of protection. So we'll be able to enforce whether you can even see metadata, right? Because sometimes, even though you can't actually access the data itself, just knowing that that asset exists can be sensitive, right? Like mergers and acquisitions. There's a nice little file called merger with company B, right? Like just the fact that it's there is bad. So we'll be able to now protect that as well. Okay, anything else? Oh, did I get bonus time? I have more time here. Okay, thank you very much for your time. If you have any other questions, have a good day.